Hi everyone, thank you very much for stopping by and returning to the old world. It may be that this is a slightly belated video, but today we are talking about the latest change to Goblin Fanatics and the impact this will have on the tabletop. So for those of you who haven't seen it, in the latest FAQ document by Games Workshop, the number of fanatics we can have in our Orc and Goblin unit has changed. We now can only take one fanatic per 10 night goblins in a unit, rather than 3 in a unit with 10 dudes in it, as used to be the case. I'm not going to be mentioning this in any detail going forward through the rest of the video, but one thing to remember sitting in the background of this is we've still got the position where if you want a unit of night goblins in your army, there is a character tax to pay. You do need to have a night goblin character for each individual unit of night goblins in that core allocation. And whilst they're pretty cheap, you're still looking at 35-40 points additional spend for every unit of night goblins that you take. And it's points going into your character allotment that you might well have preferred to either be using to dish out another character or be padding out a unit in the special or rare categories. So that is the change. What does this mean? Well, fundamentally, we can't do those small throwaway units of night goblins anymore to flood the table with a wall of fanatics. As amusing as that may or may not be for you and your opponent. If you want 3 fanatics in a unit, you're going to have to run 30 models. Now let's be honest, fanatics, they're pretty dash good. D6, strength 5 hits, AP 3, hard to kill due to the targeting rules. Really good against those expensive 1 wound armoured dudes. Crashing into knights that suddenly only have a 6 up or really best a 5 up armour save. Heavily armoured infantry like Chaos Warriors, their armour save just disappears. So having loads of these guys floating around, pretty useful. And I think the release rules, how they are for Warhammer The Old World, certainly when you compare them to the world that, well, the world that was in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, being released at the start of any start of turn subphase means they're a lot more reliable about when they're being released. Back in the day, you could use chaff to get close enough. I think it was something like within 8 inches, something like that, of a unit of goblins, and the night goblins would automatically throw their fanatics out of the unit and at that target. So you could bait them at nice and early. No longer an option, and hasn't been for the duration of this game. So having just said fanatics quite strong. Yes, there's some unreliability in there. You're looking at D6 hits, you're looking at randomized movement. But was this really a problem? So I can't say, having looked at some lists online and seen the chat around what's looking good, what's looking competitive in Orcs and Goblins, that I've really seen a load of MSU night goblins running around, launching fanatics left, right and centre to drench the board in their killing potential. And I think there's good reason for that. If you don't get the first turn, if you've only got a unit of 10 or so night goblins, they're actually relatively easy to take off the field. They're only toughness 3. We're looking at pretty much negligible armour and low leadership. So can be forced into panic tests, can be made to break and flee, or just push back out of a position where they want to be relatively easily, unless you're then chucking a load of extra resource at keeping them around the general or something like that in order to buff their leadership. That then takes out their flexibility. It means they have to be more concentrated and doesn't allow you to put a wall of fanatics across the table. So if you went really small, I suppose it begs the question, is it worth spending the 90 plus points extra on the fanatics and any netters or anything you might want in a unit when you've only got 10 or 15 gobos in the first instance. When we look at building out the core of an Orc and Goblin force, certainly the grand army composition, it's still pretty easy, I think, to fill out your core allowance with Night Goblins and get a reasonable number of Fanatics on the table. 2 units of 30 with 3 Fanatics in each unit still gives you a minimum of 6 Fanatics. And if you want to chuck a small unit in, you can maybe squeeze a 7th Fanatic in there without really exceeding too excessively your 500 point core allowance. Personally, the list I'm playing with at the moment for Orcs and Goblins has gone from 3 units of 20 odd Night Goblins, 15 at the lowest end, I think, 1 unit, 2 units of 30. I've applied some magical bust to really get the most out of archery with them, and then lobbing in a troll just to get to that 500 point mark. Yes, it has reduced the potential output Fanatics by a third, because I will have 6 rather than 9 of them, but it doesn't feel like I'm massively losing out as a result. And I could, if I wanted to make a couple of extra tweaks to the list. It's what, a couple of 100 points you need for a full unit of goblins with Fanatics, just over 200 points. If I really wanted them, I'm sure I could find that, or send out some torpedoes. And what do I mean by torpedoes? So there has been an established tactic, which might be the reason why we've seen Games Workshop make this particular change, rather than flooding the table with Fanatics. And that's taking a unit of Night Goblins, putting them in a marching column, rushing them up the table, using magic to try and get them to move twice, so they end up really turn 1 in the grill of an opposing unit, preferably something like those Chaos Warriors or the Knights, where they really don't want to be walking into a load of Fanatics. And then using the new release rules of releasing any start of turn phase to really put them in a position where they've got Fanatics where it's going to cause maximum disruption. You can only really do this with 1 unit, but it's 3 Fanatics in a really, really bad location. Now, having a small unit of goblins do this, because those goblins are going to be removed very quickly, because they're going to eat all of the shots, charges, whatever it is that your opponent wants to throw at them. So doing it with a unit which costs very little apart from the 90 points you're spending on the Fanatics makes it a lot more sensible than putting 200 odd points of stuff in that position. Because, alright, the Fanatics might get their points back, but you're gifting your opponent quite a few points really out of the gate, and there's always the possibility then that your opponent, if they're able to survive the Fanatics without losing full units or anything too horrendous, it does give them the option of refusing to engage with your main battle line and trying to just stay out of your way, because turn 1 you've given them a 200 point lead on the scoreboard, and that's enough to grant them a victory. So overall, what do I think about it? I don't think this change really changes the feel massively of Orcs and Goblins as a faction. It perhaps discourages players to skew too heavily into, well, a skew list of MSU Night Goblins, and I don't really have a problem with that. I think it fits the narrative far more that you've got larger blocks of goblins rather than 10 dudes and 3 Fanatics. The only thing I really think it does is it makes the Night Goblin torpedo tactic something that is less viable. It's still potentially strong. I'll be interested to see how that comes out, because it is still delivering 3 fanatics right up in someone's face. And of course, you've then got a unit of night goblins that still needs to be dealt with. It might be an expensive distraction, but it will still act as that distraction point, particularly if you're then having to launch charges and get involved in stuff when really you want to be maneuvering around the table to look at better options, giving you time to get your other main battle line units in to the positions that you want them. So ball boys, chariots, trolls, giants, stuff like that. And so there we have it. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you think that the reduction in the number of fanatics, or the increase, I should say, of the number of night goblins you need in order to take the maximum amount of fanatics is absolutely game-changing for the orcs and goblins? Will this change how we're seeing them operated on the tabletop, or is it just going to iron out a few of the creases in the more of the ridiculous end of the SKU lists? Do let me know down in the comment below. As always, if you've enjoyed this video and others like it, do think about checking out the back catalogue if you've not already done so, dropping a subscribe and a like, all of which really helps a small channel such as this one. Thank you once again. I am Return to the Old World. Have a great day.